On my left is Dr. Neil Khor. He holds a PhD, a doctorate degree on ethnic nationalism from the University of Cambridge. Neil has written a number of books on ethnic communities and also the Baba Nyonya in Malaysia. And Neil will give you a run-through on ethnic nationalism and how that has embedded in the political system in Malaysia. And Neil will be the one doing the historical rundown, the historical perspective, and I'll be going into some of the statistics of it later. So without much ado, I would like to pass on the podium to Neil now for his short speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Keping, for that introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to PISA. This is my first time in this wonderful building. I think I must begin with a little disclaimer. I am not an expert on ethnic nationalism as advertised. I did my thesis on the Peranakans, and that is sort of the opposite of ethnic nationalism. However, I am a historian of Penang, and I'd like to begin my rundown, or as described by Keping, by looking at the history of elections in Penang. As you all know, Penang is a very special state. In 2008, it is one of the hot states. In fact, it is so hot, it's actually quite sizzling, despite the weather. And I think the weather is sort of very helpful to the government, because it keeps people out indoors. But Penang has a very long history of electoral politics. In fact, the first elections limited to ratepayers was held as early as the 1880s. And if you, for those of you who are slightly older, you will probably remember the 1950s when we had elections then. And Penang was the first urban settlement to have an election in 1951, much earlier than any other state. And so Penangites are very used to elections. Of course, in those days, we had what's called the third arm of government, and that was the municipal elections. Municipal elections were ended in 1964, and so we don't have that anymore. And I will touch on that a little bit later. So one of the important figures that came up from this long history of elections is, of course, none other than our state hero, Dr. Lim Chong You. I think those of you who are a bit younger might not remember Tun Lim, but Tun Lim built up whatever you're seeing around you. Tun Lim was the founder of the Radical Party in the 1950s, and then of course he was also president of the MCA before eventually starting the United Democratic Party, and of course Parti Gerakan Rakyat. Why do I bring up Tun Lim at this juncture? I beg to differ with the Honourable Tan Sri Khor that Penangites feel that they don't really need to know who their chief minister to be will be. I think that is a great concern in Penang, because Tun Lim and then even Dr. Khor have created very big shoes for their successor to step into. And it's very important to realize that in a state which is so developed and that really needs to go to the next level, we need a leader. And at this juncture, it might be advisable for the government to have a clear candidate. And I think this is one reason why Penang is hot, because we are losing a chief minister, but we don't really know who will be replacing him. I would now like to look at the political parties who are taking part in this election. Now, Penang is hot because, as I said, we're going to have a new chief minister and we don't know who that person is going to be. Secondly, almost all the major political parties, except for PAS, has got very strong candidates in Penang. We know that Parti Keadilan Rakyat is much better organized this time around, and the presence of Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim who is from Penang and formerly Deputy Prime Minister, has some influence. We also know that the Secretary General of the DAP is taking part in elections here in Penang, And that too makes Penang a hot seat. More interestingly, of course, our Prime Minister is from Penang. So all these political parties are converging on Penang. And so far, I've just stated the obvious. Now let's look at the political parties and their histories, because I'm just laying the context so that when Kaping analyzes each of the candidates and their manifestos, it will make more sense. On one end of the spectrum, we have what is known as the Barisan Nasional, with its core race-based parties, the UMNO, MCA, and MIC. All this while, race-based parties have had an upper hand, because there's this primordial feeling of race, which Malaysians easily tap into. Now, lately, there has been a great contradiction in terms, because the government itself has been promoting what is something called Bangsa Malaysia. And I think that was part of Wawasan 2020. And ladies and gentlemen, if you count down the date, it's only 12 years away. Now, what is Bangsa Malaysia? Bangsa Malaysia is an aspiration that we will be a united nation, where each of us will have equality, regardless of race and religion. Pak La, Prime Minister, last year went to town in the 50th anniversary celebrations, painting a very bright future for Penang and for Malaysia as well. So this creates a contradiction in terms, because on one hand you have race-based parties ruling the country, on the other hand you have this aspiration to become a united nation. So is this election very important in Penang, because we might actually be participating in the dismantling of race-based parties? We don't really know. The problem with having race as part of your party constitution is that you become very rigid, and it's very difficult to maneuver out of it. And of course, as I said, race is a primordial instinct and has so far been a vote winner. But it's a double-edged sword, and I think the MIC is feeling a lot of heat now, being a race-based party and facing Hindraf. And I think it's very important to look at the advertisements that the MIC is sticking out in newspapers, telling the Indians, we care, and we always listen to you. The ultimate problem is, are you able to deliver? Is the MIC delivering to the Indians? And I think that is what is fueling a sense of dissatisfaction among the Indians. As a friend just now said, the Indians feel disillusioned. And this is actually creating a contradiction among Chinese voters, because I think if it can happen to the Indians, maybe 20 years down the road, Chinese will have to have Chindraf, something like that. So this is causing some hesitancy in terms of voting. But to be fair to the government has delivered development. When Lim Chong-yu wrestled Penang from the alliance government, he made it very clear that he promised the people of Penang two things. One, innovative leadership, and two, a continually improving quality of life. And these two things is something sort of like a quid pro quo. The people of Penang will support government as long as the government keeps developing Penang, keeps improving our quality of life. One candidate, for example, in Pulau Tikus, has mentioned that they will develop Pulau Tikus. The problem is not many places left to develop, unless, of course, you want to build on top buildings. The central issue now is quality of life. Coming back to political parties, we have what is also called non-sectarian parties. And in Penang, the two most influential non-sectarian parties are Gerakan and the Democratic Action Party, or DAP. Gerakan, unfortunately this year, has fielded not a single Indian candidate. It has also not fielded a single woman candidate in Penang. Its Wanita chief is fighting in Greek. So I think this... Eng Siulai is standing in Greek. Bukit Tengah.